The story begins just 4 hours before a criminal named Beckett is scheduled to be executed. The prison chaplain, Father James Morris, visits his cell. He tells Beckett that this might be his very last chance to speak to anyone. With the clock ticking down to his death, Beckett finally decides to tell the truth. He tells the priest his real story, a story that doesn't actually start with him, but with his mother, Mary Redfellow. Mary was the heiress to a massive family fortune valued at a staggering $19 billion. One night, she met Beckett's father. They made love in his car, and Mary ended up pregnant. When she broke the news to her wealthy father, he completely disowned her and threw her out of the house. To make things worse, during Beckett's birth, his father suffered a pulmonary embolism, a sudden blood clot in his lungs, and died right there in the hospital. Despite being cut off, Mary later told Beckett a secret. They might have been kicked out of the family fortune, but they weren't kicked out of the inheritance. The family rule stated that the fortune, the real estate, the private islands, all of it would be passed down to the oldest living relative. Since Beckett was the youngest, it meant he could inherit the entire billion-dollar empire someday, assuming he simply outlived everyone else. Even as a single mother struggling to get by, Mary made sure Beckett was raised with all the culture, class, and style of a high society gentleman. During this time, young Beckett met a girl named Julia. When she asked where he lived, he told her Belleville Township, but he quickly added that he wouldn't be there forever because he was in line to inherit a massive fortune. Julia brushed it off, thinking he was just a kid trying to impress her. But the spark was there. One day, after a piano session, Beckett sat down next to her. The lights flickered off, and the two of them shared their first kiss. But the happiness didn't last. Beckett's mom fell seriously ill. Nobody had paid attention to her symptoms. Beckett knew deep down that her billionaire family had the resources to save her, but they completely ignored her. On her deathbed, Mary made Beckett swear a promise. She told him never to quit until he got the exact life he deserved to have. Her final wish was to be buried in the Redfellow family mausoleum. But even in death, the family rejected her. When a grieving Beckett marched up to his family's massive estate to demand his rightful place, all he got was a cold piece of paper. The letter simply read, "We cannot provide help at this time." After that, Beckett was thrown into the New Jersey foster care system. He never saw Julia again. Many years later, Beckett was working a painfully average job as a suit salesman. That's when fate intervened and he ran into Julia again. She recognized him instantly. Beckett was still stuck living in Belleville Township. Julia, however, had lived a glamorous life. Beckett asked if she wanted to grab a drink, but Julia revealed she was married. Before leaving, she dropped a line that changed everything. "Call me when you have killed them all." That single sentence lit a fire inside Beckett's brain. He started doing the math. There were exactly 7 Redfellows walking the earth, living in luxury, while his mother lay in a cheap grave. If he was going to prune a few branches off the family tree, who would be first? The first name on the list was Taylor Exit Redfellow, a wealthy broker working at his father's financial firm. Beckett started wondering how he could pull off a murder, telling himself he wasn't capable of something so dark. But right around that time, his boss told him he was being transferred to a shipping center in Jersey City, a miserable job Beckett absolutely did not want. That was the final push he needed. The scene shifts to one of Taylor's wild parties. Taylor was literally throwing stacks of cash out of a helicopter before jumping straight into the pool. Beckett slipped into the party totally unnoticed. Later, Taylor stumbled onto his nearby yacht completely wasted, while the rest of the guests passed out drunk. This was Beckett's golden opportunity. Beckett grabbed a heavy boat anchor and tied the rope around Taylor's leg. He stood there holding the anchor, hesitating, wondering if he could really cross that line. But suddenly, Taylor coughed. The unexpected jolt startled Beckett, making the heavy anchor slip right out of his hands. It plunged into the dark ocean, dragging a helpless Taylor down to the bottom. Beckett panicked and ran. Beckett attended Taylor's funeral, playing the role of the grieving relative. That's where he met Taylor's father, Warren Redfellow. Beckett introduced himself as Mary's son, Warren's nephew. The two of them sat down for a drink, and Warren admitted he should have kept in touch. When Warren asked what Beckett did for a living, he offered him Taylor's old spot at his high-end financial firm. Beckett said he wasn't remotely qualified, but Warren just smiled and said, "It's nepotism." Beckett needed the money, so he took the job. It was a massive struggle at first, but slowly he mastered the work. A year passed, and Julia called him out of the blue. She said they should try grabbing drinks and see what happens. Beckett gassed her out, but Julia reminded she was still married. Annoyed, Beckett dropped it and shifted his crosshairs to his next target, his cousin, Noah Redfellow. Noah was an artist. By now, Beckett was way more confident in his deadly game. He found Noah at an art show, admiring one of his own paintings. Beckett played the ultimate fan before revealing they were actually cousins. They hit it off, and Noah took Beckett into his personal photography darkroom to sneak a smoke. That's when Noah's girlfriend Ruth walked in. Beckett and Ruth clicked instantly. They had a great conversation, and she invited him to a group dinner on Thursday. Beckett realized he needed a flawless plan. At the Thursday dinner, the tension was obvious. Ruth loved kids, Noah hated them. While everyone was distracted, Beckett sneaked back into Noah's darkroom. He poured sulfur and potassium chloride into the photographic stop bath. This chemical combo basically turned the cleaning supplies into a hidden stick of dynamite. The cops would just think Noah made a careless mistake with his chemicals, and the spark would be blamed on his cigarette habit. Noah went looking for Beckett, so Beckett intentionally broke the darkroom light bulb. After dinner, Beckett walked outside but purposely forgot his jacket. Ruth came out to hand it to him, and in the heat of the moment, the two of them kissed. At that exact second, back inside, Noah flipped the darkroom light switch. The blast went off. Beckett showed up at Noah's funeral, but this time he intentionally kept his distance from Ruth to give her time to grieve. But things were getting complicated. FBI agents approached him at the funeral, pointing out that he was technically an heir to the massive estate. Beckett played dumb perfectly. He acted shocked, claiming he knew nothing about the money. He pointed out that he was just a regular guy working a 9-to-5 job. If he was a billionaire heir, why would he be working in an office? The feds bought it. Life at the firm was going great for Beckett until Julia suddenly showed up at his office. She was his new client. She needed a desperate loan because her husband had inherited his father's brokerage firm but had zero talent for running it. Beckett coldly told her his office wasn't a bank. Julia tried to bribe him, offering under-the-table favors, but Beckett completely shut her down. On her way out, Julia smirked and asked if he had heard about the Redfellow family tragedies, whispering, "Who's next?" She clearly knew what he was doing. Beckett didn't let her slow him down. To create a rock-solid alibi, he handed his custom suit to a coworker and sent the guy out to walk past the office CCTV cameras. Meanwhile, Beckett slipped away to hunt down his next target, Stephen Redfellow. Stephen was a corrupt modern-day pastor who was wanted in 2 different countries for money laundering. He had a lot of enemies. Beckett posed as a magazine interviewer named Ben Johnson to get inside Stephen's house. While they were talking, Beckett secretly slipped a deadly powder into Stephen's drink. But Stephen was sharp. He suddenly pulled out a razor-sharp katana, held it directly to Beckett's throat, and said he knew exactly who he was. Why? Because the real Ben Johnson had retired 8 months ago. Stephen demanded the truth before he sliced his head off. Backed into a corner, Beckett confessed. He admitted he wasn't a reporter. He was Beckett, his cousin. This completely threw Stephen off. He had assumed Beckett was a journalist from the Post sent to write a hit piece. In that brief moment of total confusion, Stephen lowered the sword and took a sip of his drink. Stephen collapsed from a massive, fatal heart attack. After Stephen's death, Beckett met up with Ruth. She confessed she was actually planning to dump Noah that very weekend anyway, so she didn't feel devastated by his death. Beckett asked her out to a fancy dinner, but Ruth suggested they just cook together at his place. But when Beckett got home, Julia was already inside waiting for him. She had literally stolen his key right in front of him. She demanded to know why he was ignoring her calls. She confessed she was completely broke and that her husband had been lying to her for years. Just as she was asking about Beckett's life, the doorbell rang. It was Ruth. Panicking, Beckett shoved Julia out the back door. He lied to Ruth, telling her his cooking attempt was a total disaster, so they went out to eat instead. They had an amazing night. Hearing all of this in a prison cell, Chaplain James stops him. He asks Beckett, "You had a great career. You had a wonderful woman. Wasn't that enough?" Beckett looks at the priest and admits that yes, it was enough, but how could he possibly stop now? Not a single one of the deaths had been investigated as a murder. He was getting away with it. By now, the surviving family members were getting paranoid. Beckett's aunt Cassandra installed high-tech laser-based security systems in all 4 of her mansions, but she forgot one place, her day spa where she spent every Tuesday. Beckett disguised himself as a spa worker and offered her a complimentary teeth whitening session. She accepted. Beckett swapped the normal paste for carbamide peroxide, an acidic agent so closely related to regular teeth whitener that the police just assumed she died from a cheap, off-brand batch. Next was his uncle MacArthur, an eccentric billionaire who owned half of the National Air and Space Museum and was planning a literal tourist trip to the moon. Beckett got disguised as an employee, walked right up to him and handed him a poisoned cup of coffee. As MacArthur's aircraft lifted off the runway, he dropped dead. Beckett's life was perfect. He bought a beautiful new house and asked Ruth to move in with him. She said yes, sweetly adding that she loved him even back when he lived in Newark and rode the public bus. But there was a problem. The next target on the list was his uncle Warren, the man who gave him his job and supported him. Beckett couldn't bring himself to hurt him. He was totally content leaving the rest of the inheritance behind. They started planning their engagement party, but the FBI returned. They cornered Beckett with more details about the inheritance and demanded to know his exact whereabouts on April 10th. Beckett coolly replied that he was buying a hot dog. The agents were stunned. How could he remember that so specifically? But when they checked the hot dog stand's CCTV footage, the man's face was completely hidden. Then nature did Beckett's dirty work. While walking together one afternoon, Uncle Warren suffered a massive natural heart attack. At the hospital, a dying Warren told Beckett that he was 61 years old. Yet Beckett was his only visitor all day. He looked at his nephew and told him to go find love, because it was way more important than chasing a money rabbit. Warren passed away, leaving only one red fellow standing, the patriarch, Grandfather Whitelaw. Whitelaw sent Beckett a letter inviting him to a private dinner at his massive estate. The problem? It was the exact same night as Beckett's engagement party. Beckett told Ruth he had to go, because this opportunity would never happen again. Ruth was furious and gave him an ultimatum: be home by 7 p.m. or miss his own engagement. Just as things couldn't get more stressful, Julia appeared. She slammed down photographic proof, pictures of Beckett sneaking into Stephen's house and handing Uncle MacArthur the poisoned coffee. She revealed she had suspected him ever since Taylor drowned, because Taylor was a swimming champion who would never drown by accident. Beckett asked what she wanted. Julia smiled and said, "Finish it." But she also wanted $300,000 by 5 p.m. She ordered him to deliver the check to her husband, Lyle. If he didn't, she would show the photos to Ruth. She added that she had been hoping for a more fun arrangement with Beckett, but the money would do. With his back against the wall, Beckett went to see Julia's husband, Lyle. As Beckett signed the check, Lyle scoffed, saying Julia was just going to take the money and leave him anyway. Then Lyle made the mistake of calling Beckett a bastard. Beckett snapped, slapped Lyle hard across the face, knocked him to the ground, and walked out. Beckett drove out to Whitelaw's isolated mansion. There was zero cell service. Meanwhile, back in the city, Ruth was waiting at an empty engagement party. Beckett walked into the massive empty house. Whitelaw greeted him, explaining he canceled the staff and party because of an incoming storm, but he just couldn't turn Beckett away. As they sat down for dinner, Whitelaw dropped the act. He told Beckett he knew he had climbed the financial ladder by breaking heads and bumping off the competition. It was terrifyingly clear Whitelaw knew exactly what Beckett had done. He admitted that Mary was always his favorite and the sharpest of the family. When Beckett angrily asked why he let her die, Whitelaw didn't answer. Instead, he walked over to the wall, pulled down a World War I trench gun that belonged to his great-great-uncle, and handed it to Beckett. Whitelaw challenged his grandson to aim it at him. Beckett raised the heavy gun, breathing heavily, but he couldn't pull the trigger. He lowered the weapon, saying he needed to get home to his fiancée. Whitelaw coldly replied that he was almost there. Beckett rushed to the door, but it was locked. A massive bodyguard was standing on the other side. Every single window in the mansion was bolted shut. Heavy footsteps echoed toward him. The second Beckett managed to pry a door open, Whitelaw raised a gun and fired at him. Trapped and fighting for his life, Beckett grabbed a display of antique arrows and brutally stabbed Whitelaw to death. Because Whitelaw fired first, the police ruled the entire thing a perfectly legitimate act of self-defense. They let him walk free. Beckett finally made it home, but Ruth was livid. She demanded to know if he was hiding something, threatening to leave forever if he lied. So Beckett told her the truth, but only about what happened with his grandfather. With the family tree fully pruned, the entire $19 billion Redfellow fortune belonged to Beckett. He and Ruth attended the lavish New York Regency Society induction ceremony. The elite crowd welcomed them with roaring applause. Beckett had finally secured his dream life. But suddenly, the FBI stormed the room and slapped him in handcuffs. They weren't arresting him for the family. They were arresting him for the murder of Julia's husband, Lyle. After Beckett had slapped Lyle and walked out, Lyle had somehow died. Beckett's fingerprints were completely covering the murder weapon, a letter opener. Julia was the one who found the body, and she told the police a devastating lie. She claimed that she and Beckett were secretly having an affair and in love. Beckett was found guilty of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced him to death. Which brings us right back to the prison cell, 24 hours before his execution. Julia comes to visit him. Beckett snaps, screaming at her, calling her a lump of coal with makeup. He spits that he would rather die in a cage than ever be with her. Unfazed, Julia drops a bombshell. She reveals that her husband didn't actually bleed to death from a murder. Lyle had killed himself. He left a suicide note, and she had been hiding it from the cops this whole time. She turns to leave, leaving him to die. Desperate, Beckett begs her to stop and asks what she wants. Julia looks him dead in the eye and says she wants everything. She demands he sign over the entire $19 billion estate to her. With his life on the line, he signs the papers, handing her his entire empire. Which brings us to right now. The chaplain finishes reading the Bible verses. He thinks he's about to die. But suddenly, the guards arrive. Julia kept her word. She released the suicide note to the authorities, clearing his name. Beckett walks out of the prison gates a free man. Ruth is waiting for him outside, but she isn't there to welcome him back. Without saying a single word, she presses his mother's locket into his hand, turns around, and walks out of his life forever. Alone and penniless, Beckett looks up. Waiting at the curb is the Redfellow limousine. Standing next to it is Julia. Beckett silently walks over, gets into the car, and the two of them drive off toward the massive Redfellow mansion to live out the rest of their dark, twisted lives together. The only person in the world who knows the full truth is the priest, and the movie ends right here. If you enjoyed this recap, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.